Always strange to see yourself on a screen, right? Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Just for the recording, I think. I don't think it broadcasts live. Yeah. So if you ask, and do feel free to stop me and ask questions at any time. Okay. Okay. I'll do that. I have one hearing aid in this ear. Yeah. Do you? Yeah. I love it because it's Bluetooth and it. I listen to my books through my hearing aid. You're going to start the PowerPoint?
Oh, okay. If you're ready.
I'm ready. There. This is my stamp. That's all I'm going to say about that. And you'll just you'll just flip it, John. Actually, this stamp was made for leather by. I live in Sheridan or near Sheridan, and King Ropes and King Saddlery are there, and they're world famous. And one of the kings, who is a leather worker there, is also a potter. So he volunteered to make my stamp. And did a great job. It's plastic, but it's really hard plastic so that it would stamp leather if I wanted it to. Next slide. I'm originally from Minnesota, which is when my accent comes out. Actually, my hometown is Minneota, Minnesota, which is so funny, I think. But my background is that 3 of my grandparents were born in Iceland and then came to America and Canada, and my 4th grandparent is Norwegian. So I haven't had my DNA done to see if there are other mixes in there, but Iceland is, they call me, when I go to Iceland, they call me a Western Icelander. They don't call me an Icelandic American because they still claim all the Icelanders who left. Next slide. And I have to say that I have not been a linear person. Not everybody is linear. And when I was teaching, parents would come to me and say, she has a degree in this and a degree in that. When is she going to settle down? And I'd say this, not everyone is linear, but we build our experiences. So these are all the things I have done. Been a student, a gift wrapper, a telephone solicitor. That was awful. A chicken cook, a terrible student. That was when I was in college the first time around. A waitress, a secretary, a marketing coordinator, a marketing consultant, a chamber marketing director. I owned a trophy shop. A student again, a potter and sculptor, university professor, an editor and publisher, a writer, editor and proofreader, and a student. I just finished another degree in 2020. So next slide. And my grandmother is on the left. She graduated, this is her graduation, college graduation picture. She graduated in 1906 with a degree in education from Gustavus Adolphus University. And that's my mother in the middle. She had a 4-year degree, 1933 from Winona State Teachers College. She was also a teacher. And they did it at traditional age. That's me on the right. And my first degree was a BFA in 1992 when I was 40, how old was I then? 46. And then my MFA, I finished in 1995, and I was just going to turn 50. And then in 2022, I finished an MA in English just before I turned 75. So I love education, and you can see where I get that. And my mother passed away when I was 4. So I kind of wonder if I wouldn't have done those degrees in more traditional age. But at the age that I was, I just treasured that learning. I got straight A's. I no longer was a bad student. And I could have just gone into anything. And students often, traditional age students will often say, why do I have to take history? Or why do I have to take English? And it all made sense to me after having lived for 4 decades or plus. And I loved it. So it was not torture to do. Next slide. So this is my mother and father. My father was a home builder, and so I was around people doing things with their hands. And it's not probably too long after that photo was taken that she passed away. She was 41 years old, and we had been born when she was older. She was 37 when I was born. And then my dad passed away when he remarried, and we moved to California. You can go to the next slide. First, we went to South Dakota, but the building stuff wasn't happening there, so we ended up in Southern California. Next slide. And he had remarried, and I inherited 2 stepbrothers. There are 2 on the right are stepbrothers, and then that's my brother on the left. And then I made myself bigger just because I always felt real unimportant when I was little. They could always beat me up. So, next slide. So then I graduated from high school there, went to San Jose State, but the day that I was leaving for college, and I tell you this not because I tell it very nonchalantly, but you know, life wasn't easy after my dad died. My stepmother she was very prejudiced toward her own too, so it made my brother and me quite close. But then the day that we graduated from high school, she said, you have to find somewhere else to spend your vacation. So we never went home again. And that was my first year of college. My brother had already had a year. And so they closed the dorms at Christmas and Thanksgiving. So we didn't have anywhere to go. We just would go home with friends. We had a little bit of money from our mother's insurance, and that was what had been put aside for us to have some money for college. So a cousin came out and saw that we were at loose ends, and she invited me to come to Chicago and spend some time with her and her husband. So the following summer, I think I was 19, almost 20. So I moved to Chicago for a couple of years. Next slide. I got married in 2 years after that. I stayed with them for 2 years. It wasn't that I wouldn't leave. They did invite me to stay. And we moved to Ohio, and he was with Goodyear, so we were there for a while. Next slide. Then here he is, and we had 2 children. The little bald one is, she lives in Sheridan, and she has a degree in psychology, which I always said she only used on me, but she worked for me when I was publishing the magazine. She was the office manager, so it was just great. And the one on the right lives in Michigan. She's an orthopedic surgeon, way brighter than I ever thought of being. And, well, they both are, actually. And, so we were then divorced. Next slide. And that's where we were in New York. And he went back to Ohio, and I stayed in New York for a while. Next slide. Then I moved back to Minnesota to be near extended family on my birth mother's side. Next slide. And then I made a strange decision, but I moved with a man to Wyoming. And, you know, I tell you this because all of these personal things, because I think it's important that all of you have stories as well. But I think particularly when there are young people in the audience, younger than we are, it's important that they know it isn't what happens to you, but it's what you do with it. And you all know that. So anyway, I moved to Wyoming. Next slide. There I am in Wyoming drinking a Coors in the mountains. Next slide. And it was there, this is what makes that move much better. I met my husband, Richard, and he always says that he kept his maiden name, which I love. And he said that he'd been in John Deere business for 38 years, but this was 1988, and he, because of all the bank failures during the 80s, he had closed the dealership, and we were both pretty broke. And but he said, you have always wanted to get your degree. Let's just go do it. So we moved down to Laramie. I called my younger daughter, the little bald one, and I said, she had just started. She was in her freshman semester, and we were going to go in January. And I called her and I said, do you mind if I come too? And there was this long pause on the phone. And she said, as long as we don't have a class together, or as long as I don't run into you at a fraternity party. And I said, it's a deal. So in January, we moved down to Laramie, and neither of us had jobs, but Richard was like me. It was like, well, I can wait tables or I can pump gas. We're not going to die. We're not going to starve. So we moved down there, and within, I don't know, we had a month's rent paid. We had no debt, and I had one semester's tuition paid. And we were looking at the checkbook, and we had $37.50. We said, ooh, we need to go to the grocery store, but we're out of beer. So anyway, he was working for the John Deere dealership locally within the next week, and we were just fine. Next slide. So this was in one of my first semesters of clay. And when I was in graduate school after this, my professor, it was Mark Johnson, I took a philosophy of art course. And one of the things that he talked about was that we should have a seventh sense, and that is aesthetic ecstasy. Because when we see something that moves us physically, it's another sense. We feel it in our gut, you know. And this is the way I felt with the mark of a tool on the clay. The way it just felt so wet and untouched, and I loved that. So this piece was extruded and thrown, and I loved the freshness of the clay. And then Cesar Baldacchini, that's not clay, but the way in which he pushed the qualities of the material really meant something to me. Next slide. So it took me about 2.5 years. I was able to transfer in some credits, and took me about 2.5 years to finish. And this was my last year. I went to Anderson Ranch in Colorado for a workshop, and it really helped me. I went into this course not really understanding metaphor and the symbolism. You know, I just really didn't have a sense of all of that. And going to that workshop, it was with Christina Bertoni, who was at Rhode Island School of Design, and it was wonderful. So this ended up being a self-portrait. And I did the self-portrait in shoes, because I think as women, we change our shoes when we change our roles, maybe to a greater degree than men do. And so I used this, and the bottom one, on the left-hand side, the very bottom one, is my baby shoe, because when I was little, I felt really important and big, you know, but then as you age, all the hang-ups that you set in. So next slide. And then for my BFA show, I did a series of closets. And if you were like me, when I was in high school, my bedroom was a mess. And when someone was going to come over, everything would go in the closet. And it's the #1 place where people hide things. So then when I'd clean out my closet, I would feel like I could just do anything. I would feel like, whoa, you know how you are when you finish a project and you put it off. And it was like if I, let's say I bounced a check, and then didn't want to face the person, I'd bounce the check, you know, all of those things that you get done and you clean them out and you feel like you can do anything. So the closet was that kind of a symbol for me. This one is pretty flat. The shoes are 3-dimensional, and the little shroud in the box are 3-dimensional. So otherwise it's pretty flat. Next slide. Then this one is maybe 6 or 8 inches deep. It has lots of cliches in it. There's a little skeleton up in the upper left. There at the bottom right is my dirty laundry, and then there are some suitcases there, my excess baggage. It's about 8 feet tall, 8 or 9 feet tall, and about 5 feet wide. And at this point, then I was up on the shelf on the right, on the left, there's a heart. Next slide. And I realized that I didn't know what the heart really looked like. So I arranged to go and draw from the cadavers in the cadaver lab. And I would go in and glove up, and they would hand me a bag full of organs, and I would sit and draw while the lab was in session. So then I learned what the organs looked like, and it made more sense to me. And then you see the edges on that heart where it was cut off. That I just spoke to me. I thought, this is amazing. And I was also doing printmaking. I was between printmaking and pottery or ceramics on deciding what I wanted to do. Next slide. And so then I applied to graduate school. I got into RISD, Cranbrook, University of Washington, and Southern Illinois at Carbondale, and I went and visited. I didn't get into Alfred. And I went and visited, and I was hooked on Southern Illinois. And maybe while I'm working, I can tell you the story of why I picked Southern Illinois, but it was mostly chemistry with the professor. Next slide. This is what I started doing I did a series of faucets in my graduate program. And the statement on there is a part of my thesis from my MA in English, that every work of art is a thesis, and that every decision that the artist makes needs to support that thesis. That's a little bit of what you do in graduate school when you go for an MFA. Okay. So, but the one that was, go back to that one, John. This, I've always needed a challenge, and I wanted to be able to convey that. So I thought the salmon is one that swims upstream. And I threw the parts of the faucet and threw the other parts, and it all fits together. And somebody read it as an environmental piece, and I care about the environment, but that wasn't what I was saying. And it was because of the industrial faucet. It made it look like it was about pollution. So I thought, I need to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying what I want to say, regardless of whether I can accept that or not. Next slide. And so I started working much more abstractly and did this one. And one thing I love about working large is that there's the sense of discovery doesn't change, because I couldn't put this together in its raw state because it wouldn't support itself. So until it was fired, I wouldn't see what it was really going to look like. And that intrigued me. It kept the sense of discovery alive. Next slide. My professor said, get off the wall, make it stand up. So I did. And this on the right, I was letting the clay have its way with me. I was not trying to control the wetness. I just let it slump. And again, it came out later in some of my work because I was watching and letting the clay just do its thing. Next slide. So that just evolved. It was, for me, it was exercising and trying to get that aesthetic ecstasy every time I touched the clay. And the way I work with clay, and you'll see this, is that when I'm making a texture, I have to watch. It's like a conversation. I have to watch to see what the clay says back to me, and then respond to that. And sometimes I might be going for a texture and I see something else, like an edge that I like better than the texture I made, and I'll change that. So it's just a response. It's never a rote kind of process. So I also make paper. I haven't done it for a while now, but this was my, the journal, or the guest book for my BFA show, my MFA show, excuse me. And I had been saving all these maps and brochures from my travels, so I ground them up and made clay out of them, or made paper out of them. And, you know, periodically you'll see a phone number or some little, I didn't grind it enough that it went away. So it's kind of a significant book. Next slide. I love those small spaces that we used to love as children to climb into. So I often will climb over a fence to look at the space between bales of hay, or these stacks of hay. Next slide. And I love the way things fit together. I'm always judging the ranchers out west to see how well they stack their clay. Sometimes it's tumbling down, and I think, oh, this man doesn't care, or this woman doesn't care. So this is the piece on the left is concrete base. So I made the concrete to fit the piece. Next slide. So then my husband had a job offer. When I finished my MFA, my husband had a job offer in Colorado, and I didn't have a teaching job yet, so we moved there. And then I was called to do a fill-in, for, like John did here, for a semester when they were doing a search in Kansas. And so I moved to Kansas. My husband stayed in Colorado, and we commuted for 4.5 years. And yeah, go ahead, next slide. So this is, I started doing more vessels. Next slide. These were my cups, and none of these had the texture on the inside. So then I realized that that metaphor was not very good. So I started thinking about how the inside should reflect the outside, as we do as people. Next. And so the insides became more visceral, I guess. Next slide. I'm interested in the body and all of those things that are inside, like these little pieces you'll see to the right of my pictures, because what we do to our bodies, we don't see. We don't see the inside, and yet we affect them. When I was drawing from the cadavers, there were 4 or 5 cadavers in there. Every one of them, all the women had hysterectomies. Every one of them was from Denver, and they all had black lungs or polluted lungs, and they were not smokers. It was just from living in a big city. And they said living in Denver was the equivalent of smoking a pack a day. Yeah, and in more polluted cities, such as Mexico City, it's worse than that. So I thought, well, good, I'm glad I don't live there. Anyway, I was also combining steel and the porcelain, and I was interested in that sense of fragility and the strength. And my husband is a pilot, so I was noticing things in the world that these things didn't necessarily influence me, but I found that clay made me notice the world in a different way than I had done before. Next. So this is, again, going back to that, that sense of discovery. I made the ceramics pieces that fit together horizontally on a table, and then I didn't know what they were going to look like until I could build the steel structure to hold them up. And so it never ended. And that's a self-portrait on the right that is actually the same size as the piece. I've got my foot on my welder. I would say I weld, therefore I am. Next. The first summer I was teaching, I received a summer teaching grant to go to a foundry and make my work in bronze. And only one foundry answered my letters. So I had made the piece on the left, and it's textured on the inside, as you saw. So I had to make a rubber mold. And this foundry that answered me is up in the mountains in Colorado, beyond where there is electricity. So I went with waxes of 3 different pieces, and my knuckles were all skinned from doing the inside I used a rubber smooth-on product, cut it, and then made a mother mold. So I had 3 waxes that I took there. This is one that was produced, and the one on the right is the bronze. So they turned out really well. But the man generated his own electricity. My little cabin there I had a propane, Coleman chandelier over my table and a gas refrigerator, and it was a wonderful experience. But I'd go into the studio in the morning and he'd say, okay, what are we going to need today? And I'd say, okay, the sandblaster, or when we got to the welding afterwards, the TIG welding, then he'd go and generate 220 off of the PTO on his tractor, the power takeoff on his tractor. So he was so innovative and just an amazing, he'd made all his own equipment. So it was a great experience. Next. Again, this is just what I noticed. These are some gesso drawings that I do where I just layer up the gesso like I do the clay and then rub pigment into them. It's what you prime a canvas with before you paint on it. It's a white liquid, and it has some substance to it. So I was able to drizzle and just paint it on or whatever. And discovering the textures. I would tape the middle, so that's just the paper in the middle with the pigment. And again, this is an aerial. You can see the airplane's wheel down there. Just is like a white patchwork quilt. That was in western Kansas. Next. So I'd made up my mind that with my parents dying so young, my mother 41, my dad 47, had now outlived them both. And so I thought, I don't know how long I have. I'm going to just take advantage of every opportunity I can. So my former professor was going to this symposium in Taiwan. There were 6 Americans, and they had 1 space, and I said, pick me. So we went to Taiwan, and one advantage of being in academia is that you get support for that kind of travel. So I was fortunate in that way. So this piece was just influenced by the museum in Taiwan. Next. This is a teapot that's now in China in the Teapot Collection. And I did, when I was there, these are actually 2 different teapots, but the one on the left is in China. I was there maybe 5 years ago and saw this on display in the museum, so that was nice. Next. In 99, yes. Yixing, do you know China at all? You know Yixing? You know the Yixing teapots. And Yixing is probably a day's drive from Shanghai. Yeah, that's where it is. Then the next summer in 99, I was a summer resident at the Archie Bray Foundation, and I challenged myself to make these tiles, and I made 100 tiles, never using the same texture twice. I just wanted to exercise my brain to see how I could come up with uses for my tools, etc. Next. And then the following year, I went to Skalsker. That first word is pronounced Guliago. In Danish. I love that. I have a Danish daughter-in-law who said, to speak Danish, you need your mouth full of mashed potatoes. And we fired the wood kiln there. It was a Fred Olsen. In fact, Fred was there. That's not my work. That's another Danish artist. Next. And the following year, I was invited to be part of a symposium in Italy. And we went to the factory and bought these forms and then spent the day at the Ceramic Art Institute there painting them. So Roberto was our instructor. And we did all of this painting in a day. They glazed them for us, and then we just did the painting. And at the end of the day, he said, "You give me 1 year, I make you master." So I didn't take him up on it. Next. And then there's a gap in there because this was before I was president of Ansica. But I was one of 25 artists invited to Sichuan, which is outside of Foshan in southern China, not too far from Hong Kong, actually, across. And we made work, and then it stayed in the museum there. Next. And then the following, or 2 years later, this is when I was president of Ansica, 2002 to 2004. So I didn't do much travel in the summer. And then I went to the pottery workshop in Jingdezhen. And was somebody here saying they'd gone there? No? You went? Yeah. And it was the very first year that they were open, but that was an amazing experience. I was there for 2 months. Next. And I wanted to do the women, but when I would photograph them on the street or in a restaurant, they would giggle or get this funny look. So I went and did Tai Chi with the local women and photographed the women doing Tai Chi because I wanted that gaze. I wanted, because the Chinese women are so strong and really. So anyway, so I did 3 of these. Next. And they made this punch for me so I could extrude the straps and cut and punch these little tiles that became the garments for the women. Next. I made 3,500 of those tiles. And then I had boxes made for the heads. On the bottom slide there, I was able to have this crate made. And to ship from Jingdezhen to Kansas City, including everything, making the box and everything, was less than $600. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Next. So these are the 3 finished pieces. They stand about 5 feet tall. Yeah. For these? Oh, yeah. These all come apart. And parts of them, like someone sculpted the feet for me, and then I made a mold of those. And in China, the buildings are flanked by lions, or they're dog lions or whatever. And the male has his right paw on a sphere to symbolize the world. The female has her paw on a baby lion. And so I gave each of the figures 2 of each. So they're well balanced, male, female. And the piece on the left, her body is made of the marriage pillows. If you laid them, there are 2 of them, bottom to bottom. If you laid them out, they would have an indentation for the couple's heads on there. So I bought those at the antique. We called it the fake antique market, but because I bought one and brought it back and it wasn't hefty enough to do what I wanted it to do, so we went back and we said, "You have another one?" They said, "No, but we can by tomorrow." So much for the antique market. Next. Then I was invited in Germany to, they shipped me these 2 figures, and did anything else come with it? I don't think so. And then I was supposed to decorate it in my style and then ship it back to them. and it had this, we were supposed to put something on this little sign that would go into it. So mine says, art makes you smart. And I did 2 of them and shipped them back over there. And they're still, one of them is in the museum's collection, and the other one is travels with the collection. And art does make you smart. Next. Then I was invited to Puping, where they have 11 ceramics museums, each dedicated to a different part of the world. And I was invited to go over when the Americans were going over to make work. And then I got the Governor's Arts Award in Kansas, and I couldn't go. So I went a month earlier, and I was there with Australians and New Zealanders. And at this point, Janet Mansfield, do any of you know of Janet Mansfield? She started Ceramics Art and Perception and Ceramics Technical. And she was in the group of Australians. And she and I she'd already approached me about buying the magazines. And I had a backer, a silent partner who wanted to do it. So nobody else knew it. And I only knew her as an Australian. So it was perfect for me to meet these 6 Australians there and get to know them. And then there were 6 New Zealanders as well. Go ahead, next slide. So I made 2 large pieces over there and used their traditional glazes. Next. And then we were in a tile factory when we were building this. So we were able to use the molds from the tile factory. So these are some of the figures that they put on the, on that edge, the roof edge that comes down. So there was this little guy on the left is a eunuch. The next one is a Tang Dynasty lady. And I just switched what shoes they wore. So the little eunuch has the soldiers, the terracotta warriors' boots. No, he has the Ming Dynasty, Tang Dynasty ladies' feet. The one at the other end has the boots. Anyway, they got all switched around. The warrior has the Tang Dynasty feet, and the lion. Anyway, so people were saying to me, "What's the owner of the tile factory going to say when he sees how you chopped up these figures?" But he loved them. He'd come through. He didn't speak English, and he would come through and he'd go, "Hung hao, hung hao." She was very good. Next. So here are the 10 that I made. So those are all in the museum as well. Next. And then the Kiwis they made me an honorary Kiwi, and they asked me to come to, they wanted me to be in the show with them in Christchurch, but I had to come. So I went down there and we had a show and did a talk. Next. And then in 2008, I took over the magazines and left academia and moved back to Wyoming after my husband in the meantime had moved to Emporia after his 5-year commitment was finished in Colorado. He moved to Emporia, 3rd move for my career. But my husband is one of those people who, I always said he could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo. He could sell meat to a vegan, he just is really good. And isn't he, John? Yeah. And so we moved back to where he's from. He's 4th generation on the land where we live in Wyoming. So that was 2008. Next. And I've always loved language. I always am yelling at the phone, or the radio or the TV for their bad grammar. Next. And so we were back in Wyoming. Next. And this is where we live. John has been there. The mountain is just right there. It's just so beautiful. And this light that's on the mountain is often there in the morning in one way, and then the night. The mountains are to the south of us, and then they wrap around to the west. And we have a gazebo. My studio is the high peaked roof, and my kiln is in the shed behind it. Next. This is inside my studio. Next. And some other work. Go ahead. I love porcelain. I like a non-groggy clay. I find that my work changes if I use a non-groggy clay. That thing next. This is a black clay that is made by Aardvark. It's called Cassius clay. I think right now it's just called Cassius. They were made to take off the capitals on the C. Next. And just some cups. Next. I think John and Lily have one of those. So this, I'm a real celadon lover. Next. Then I started this bowl project, and it was in 2015 I started the project, and a friend of mine was going to fire in Chris Guston's kiln in Massachusetts, and I said I wanted to see what my work would be like in in the wood. And so I asked her if she would take a bowl to fire. She said sure, but she'd have to ask Chris, and I know Chris, so he was open to it. But he said she has to send 2 bowls. One would be for the auction, a silent auction at Watershed, and the other one he would ship back to me. So these are the 2 bowls that came out of the Guston kiln, and I realized that I really wasn't learning what my work would look like. You know, it could vary depending on the kiln. So I thought, well, I'm going to do more of this. So I started doing it state by state. Next. And these are some of the results, and you can see the variety just based on the kiln, the wood that they used, the length of the firing, the amount of reduction. So each of them documented their firings before I shipped them a form along with the bowl, and they would ship it back to me. I'd send them a prepaid label for them to mail it back to me. And every day that one came, it was like Christmas. Then I had just a couple of them back, and in 2016, at the night before the Kansas City NCECA, I fell down a flight of stairs and almost died. We were in an Airbnb, and I went through the wrong door in the middle of the night, thinking I was going into the bathroom, and fell down in the basement. And so that I couldn't work, I couldn't do anything. So it put the project on hold for a while. So it was probably just in the fall of 2019 that the last bowl was fired. So it was 4 or 5 years. But you can see the difference. Go on, there's another. The one on the left is Justin Lambert. He's no longer in Florida, he's in Colorado now, but he fires like 5 days, and he reduces down. So he doesn't just turn the kiln off and let it cool, but he reduces and lowers the temperature as he goes. So it's an amazing one. And then the one on the right, Minnesota, Linda Christensen, she's in a Bury box kiln. She fires about 20 hours, very little reduction. Next. The one on the left is Hawaii, so he's using all local wood. Plus, Justin Lambert, I showed this in Pittsburgh when NCECA was there, and he went around looking at all the bowls to see which ones had residual salt on the coast, because the wood would have residual salt in it. So he could tell, the effect of that on the bowl. Jack Troy is on the right, and his wife went through and said, this work looks like the person who fired it. It looks like their work. Next. So this is how they displayed it in NCECA. And one of the things that I love about this is that I relate it to the human being, and that these all start with the same DNA. They're all the same clay. It's continental clays, Graulig porcelain. They're all the same glaze, which is Fred Olson's Chino for wood fire. And that they come out so different. And you can tell, if you go back one, John, you can see, like on the left, Jack Troy's, you can see which way that bowl was sitting in the kiln by where the ash landed. And they tell their own story. And the one from Hawaii is just a little bit distorted because of the heat, and he fires for 100 hours. So they really have their own stories. Okay, go ahead. Two. Then I was invited to be a demonstrator in Australia at Gulgong. That was really good. Next. I still say yes to almost everything. And my husband, you know, he's the most supportive man, except for you, Chris. But when I come home and say, they want me to do that, you want me to take over ceramics, he says, who better than you? You know, he always says that. Just, yeah. So this is a form I just revisited not too long ago. I love this form, and so I've made quite a few of these recently. Next. And this, someone was asking me about my inspiration for the boxes, and it's both European and Chinese, in that they both made these boxes to carry things places. Next. So then I started making the boxes, and this is the one that's here. Then the other one, I dyed the leather and I was able to use the same mold. I made a wooden mold from laminated 2x6s, and then cut it on the bandsaw, and then sanded it down, ground it down until it was the right shape. So it fits in here, so I could mold the leather, the wet leather, over it. And I was able to use that for both of these pieces. Next. But I do some where they fit right in the inside. And the way I work with that leather, it's not unlike the way I work with porcelain, in that once I make the inside mold, then I lay the leather, I use very soft leather, I lay the leather over it and press the piece down in it, and what happens is what happens. So it makes its own form. It wrinkles where it wants to, and I love that look. It's just a styrofoam form, yeah. Next. There's another one that, just the box. Next. This was a workshop at Emporia State. Next. So then in 2020, I told you I earned an MA in English, and this was my thesis statement. Every decision that the artist makes supports her thesis. And then I think it's the job of the critic or the writer to discover that thesis, to interpret the language. And that puts the onus back on the artist, because if somebody writes about your work and they don't get it, then it's something that, well, it could be the writer, but it's probably something that the artist isn't conveying. It isn't in the work. And those are the ways in which I think that writer, that's what I do when I start writing an article. In fact, I have 2 articles in the current Ceramics, Art, and Perception. Anyway, the writer has to describe, respond to the work, interpret the work, associate it with other artists or other things, maybe bring theory in, evaluate it, and understand historic lineage, and then to clearly and understandably write it and explain it. You look puzzled. You have a question? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Next. Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true. If it's within my thesis, if it's not contrary to what I want, I'm perfectly happy with it. But contrary means I'm not communicating. And I don't think it should be like a one-liner. It shouldn't be like a one-liner. It doesn't mean that everything is obvious to the general viewer, but and we always bring our own experiences to things. But I still stand by this as a writer and as an artist, that if I'm going to write about my own work, and tomorrow we're going to have you work on your own aesthetic and understanding it a little bit more, and then you'll see what I mean. So these last few images are just things I love. We collect cups like every potter seems to do. Next. I love texture. I listen to Tom Waits. I listen to Leonard Cohen and Marlene Dietrich. I love textured voices. So I think that the way I work permeates my life. I love to bite into something and get a surprise, like something sweet in there or something crunchy, and that's the way I am with my work. Go ahead. My husband leaves the lid up, and I put the lid down. And so when we first got together, I realized that it was not an annoyance. We're different. I don't want us to be identical, and that it was evidence of his presence. So I would go into the bathroom and I would say, "Oh, Richard was here last." And one day he would take me to graduate school, and then he would go do his thing, and then he'd pick me up. And I'd know I was the last one in the bathroom when we left. And I'd come home and the lid was up. And I'd say, "Oh, you were home today," you know. So we just reversed that. Instead of being annoyed by somebody not doing it our way, we just did a mind shift, and it was just evidence of the other's presence. And we still do it that way. Next. But we agree on the important things. Next. I understand that if you have a cat, that's not the best way, but I really believe that we need to switch the way we look at things. We need to do some mind shifts periodically. This actually happened when I was in undergraduate school, except that the model was nude as well. Next. I believe we can never know everything about somebody. You know who this is. Ronald Reagan. He was at, I think he went to USC, and he was a model in his little tighty-whities. Next. I love my Scandinavian heritage and have traveled to every Scandinavian country except Finland. And so this is a museum in Denmark. And I learned through a film at this museum that the Vikings didn't measure anything, and I don't measure anything. I eyeball. My husband said, "Oh, that's where you get it." Next. So in 2017, my husband and I went with 2 Danish friends to Iceland again, and we did the perimeter, and this is a cousin, and I was able to visit the farmsteads of my 3 grandparents who were there. Yeah, it was quite an emotional trip. Next. I believe we have to know the questions as well as the answers. Ann Piper gave me this card. On the inside, it says, "These are the things I need you for." What? Oh, you have this card? What does it say? Oh, yeah, this is. Oh, sure. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Next. And there's something that I love about trying something new, brand new, and there's that process of awkwardness at the beginning. You just can't do it. And then you figure out, by doing it repeatedly, you figure out a system, and then it becomes smooth. I like to start new things because of that evolution of the process. Next. And I feel like a duck. floating along on the water, making it look easy, but paddling like hell underneath. And that's it. That's me. Thank you. Yes. Aesthetic ecstasy. Yeah. Yeah. I think that the ecstasy, for me, it comes from form and the way I work with the clay. The freshness of, whether it's on the wheel or on the, or in hand, that freshness and things. And that, to me, I have to own it in my work. Right now, this is a terrible thing for me to say. I'm kind of tired of working this way. I still enjoy the textures, but I've got to make a change soon. I just need to switch. So I'm going to have to think about those things that we all think about, and what is my thesis? What do I want to continue? In these pieces, the aesthetic ecstasy happens up here and on the wheel. And for me, it does. And then I find it hard to go back to just a flat foot now unless I'm making a cup, because I love this lift. But one of the things that I thought about, and it was in my thesis when I did my MFA, and that is, it reflects my life in that I like to push things to be as fluid as possible, but maintain stability. So to get this foot and the difference between this, and yet to make it still stand stably. So to me, that's really important. And then to enjoy the process is where the aesthetic ecstasy comes in. If I'm not, whether I'm working with paper or drawing or anything, if I'm not enjoying that mark on the page or the way the clay responds on the wheel, then I need to switch what I'm doing. Does that make sense? It's going to vary. There are people who would probably walk by my work and say, oh. And several of you came up and picked it up and went, oh. So that's a part of an expression of that sense of aesthetic ecstasy, I think. Does that answer that? Yeah, go ahead. Well, it's all of those things. I mean, it's the process. I'm really into form. I do push this that stability versus the fragility and the tenuous stability of it. So yeah, I mean, when I first made this form, whether I was doing it in porcelain and all white or the black or this, and then lately, it's been, and this was a part of it, the atmospheric firing is another part of that, and that when you do atmospheric firing, you're willing to take what comes. You give up control. I'm not a controlling person, so I'm to the point that there are flaws in my work. I'm not, sometimes you probably couldn't put water in here. There might leak out here, but that's kind of the way my life is. So it's a reflection of that. If I'm true to that, then the thesis is going to come through. One hopes. You might not stand up here and say, "Oh, is it stable? Is she stable?" Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do, but I'm not a not a person to put a lot of titles on. I figure if they don't get it, then they don't get it. And you, like you were saying, everybody brings their own experiences to it. So it's just that, like that faucet, I didn't want to own that this was an environmental piece. That's not what I intended. So I failed in that piece, even though I think it was successful as an environmental piece. um, yeah, yeah, it doesn't exist anymore, but no, right, right, yeah. But you know, we react to form, we respond to form, and we really either love the form of something, or we think this is bottom heavy. This doesn't, you know, all the elements, whether it's a pot, a functional pot, or a sculptural piece, or a painting, we respond to the formal elements of that piece. And then if we take the time or make the time, then we respond maybe a little more intellectually. I used to tell my students when we would take them to New York to go to the museums about once a year, and in fact, one time John went with us, and John whips out his crocheting, and by the end of the flight, we had all of them, male and female, crocheting on the plane. Remember that? It was. Anyway, New York. So I would tell them, when you go through the museum, make the work grab you. You know, just walk through casually. And when you see something that physically moves you, then spend your time with that. But we all know how it's easy to get information overload in a museum. And I didn't want them to run out of energy before they got to the things that they really responded to. So, like, I respond to the way in which Van Gogh used the paint right out of the tube. You know, that juicy, obviously, that juicy, lovely stuff that was on that canvas. So I wanted the students to make the work respond to them, or make it, yeah, you know what I mean. Any other questions? Yes. Uh-huh. Mm. Okay. Exhibition, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of aesthetic ecstasy there. That ah, yeah, yeah. It is. Yeah, yeah. And it's going to be different for everyone. You know, for tomorrow, what I'm going to ask you to do is to find at least 5 images that you can print out and bring with you of objects that give you that sense that you respond to physically. And we're going to do some exercises to zero in on what your aesthetic is. And I want you to also bring at least one finished piece that you made. And we're going to try to bring those two things together, see if they're linked. Yeah. Okay. Was that all on the tape too?
Yeah.
Because John told me I should repeat your questions, and I didn't.
I've been typing them in.
Have you? Oh, good. Good for you. Good for you. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to take my boots off, put my shoes on. Oh, you do? Well, let's take a little break. And when I come back, I'll have my apron on and I'll be ready to work. Okay? No, I just have never, I've tried it and I've never been good at it, so. You have one that I don't have to, so I don't have to put wads around it? If you want. She's going to get a foam mat. Can you tap on a foam mat? Foam mat? Oh, can you? Okay. Oh, it's got little circles. Yeah. Whoa. I'm in heaven. Yeah. For sure. Here, wait a minute. Oh, here. She's got them. They're marked even.
Yeah, they're marked.
Nope. The what? Oh, no, I've got some out here, but I guess I don't need them on this. No. Oh, that's so nice. Yeah. Hit it, John. Okay. Okay. Look at, oh, see? No. Yeah. Yeah. Your little thingy? Yeah. Like a lid or something on top? Some people put some kind of a lid on top. I'm going more slowly in case it snags again. So, a well-known writer and, what do I want to say, gallerist, a few years ago made the comment that you can't write, what do I do with that? Oh. Oh, how cute is that? That you can't write theory about functional pots. I totally disagree. What do you think? It was, I said, a well-known writer and gallerist a few years ago made the statement that you cannot write theory about functional pots. If you're going to write about just about, yeah, just about, yeah. So I totally disagree with him, and I'm working on gathering information to write an article just on that and bring in theory on different pots. And one of the things is, okay, I have to stop working for just a second and talk. One of the things is I read an article by Peter Stallybrass, who's a philosopher, and he was writing about a friend of his dying. The name of the article is Worn Worlds, W-O-R-N, Worlds. And the thing he was writing about, or he was giving a talk, and his best friend had died, and he ended up with his friend's jacket. And number one, he talks about how the wrinkles in the sleeve are unique to that man, his friend. So we take off a garment and our body is impressed into that. And the only difference between that and clay is that we fire it in. We fire in the fingerprints and the impressions that artist has made on those pots. And I mean, that's just one theory that I think, when you saw the cup collection that we have, most of them have some imprint of the artist. most of them have a fingerprint or a specific thing that that artist did to impress upon that. And at Ensika, at the show Belonging, there was a series of 3 plates that were pinched. And were actually, I think they were coiled, but you could see the pinch marks of the artist. And then on the inside was a picture of this, like a stuffed chair. And I thought, what a great pairing. Here's the impression that a body is going to make in that chair, and his impression is frozen into, fired into that plate. And so I'm gathering information like that, where I know the theory and I know I can relate it to a pot. I mean, maybe not a Walmart pot, but I can relate it to the pots that are here that have the throwing marks of the artist who made it. And every pot that I own, or that my husband and I own, we know most of, probably 90% of the artist. So you think about that artist. It's like the man had to quit doing his talk because he felt like he was being possessed by this person who had just passed away just by wearing this jacket. So anyway, pots are equally as important to me as sculpture is. And I think they're harder. I don't consider myself a good thrower or a good functional potter because, and I want to be, I'm a functional potter wannabe, because you have the content, but you have to make it function too. So it complicates it. It makes it harder to me than to make a dysfunctional pot like that little one that's in that. I mean, I love making bowls and I'm good at bowls, but I don't feel like I've made very many good cups or good plates. And I think they're harder than making sculpture, because you still have to think of all those formal elements. And so the exercise, the thing that we're going to do tomorrow is, I used to have my students do this. I would give an assignment of a cup, and before they could touch clay, they had to come in with their journal and have 3 pages of images that gave them aesthetic ecstasy, that moved them. And then the second 3 pages, they had to make a list of the qualities of each of those pieces. So if it was geometric or organic or unstable, whatever. Then the next 3 pages, they had to pick a word and draw it. So let's say it was geometric. Then they had to draw as many ways that they respond, what was geometric to them. So it might be a circle, a diamond, a square, a triangle, etc. Then they had to pick another word. Let's say the word was dynamic. So how do they take those geometric forms and make them dynamic? They had to keep going with that. By the end of it, they had their cup. All they had to do was put a handle on it. They had their forms. And I had one student in particular, I was collecting the journals, and she said, I've got to have it back in the morning. I need that journal now, because she really had gotten into figuring out what her aesthetic was, what moved her, and putting words on it, and then putting pictures on that, and being able to bring that into her work. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Yeah, they were ceramic students. Well, they weren't ceramics majors necessarily. I didn't have any students who were not art majors. It was a 4-year university, so. Well, but you're making work. So, I mean, go and look at, maybe you want to look at ceramics and pick out ones that really move you. Pick out You know, what artists do you look at? I don't think you have to be an artist. Everyone has an aesthetic, right? And it doesn't mean that
I'm
the,
just throwing out things that I think about.
yeah,
I can't draw.
you don't, yeah, but you can learn to draw.
So they say.
Yeah,
Right, they all
yeah, yeah. If you have the urge to draw, you'll be able to learn to draw. But you can prove us wrong, too, if you want to. Yeah. So, what potters do you look at? What potters are out there that you really think, wow, that's. I've heard of him.
And John.
John Hasegawa's stuff. Yeah, I've heard of him too. So, could you hear that, John? She said her work has kind of a folk look. Oh, he's gone. He's gone. I know.
I would like to learn.
Uh-huh.
Still have it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The latest you came up with? So, when you sit down at the wheel, what are you thinking about? What are you, do you come to it and always make the same shape or the same form? No? Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll be quiet. I don't think I've brought a metal rib. Just one. Those are serrated. Oh, good. I've got a serrated one. Thank you.
They're not clean, but.
That's okay. Mine aren't. My tools aren't clean either. I'm going to go a little deeper here. I think I'm going to go a little deeper here. I didn't say that very loud. I do at least she wants to know how thick I make my bottoms. I usually try to stop about an inch from the bottom because I like a deep foot. Yeah. That way I get the lift off of the table. Just a little off. Well, I think that you'll be able to maybe just start looking at a magazine or online, look up pots, and I think you should be able to find something that moves you, yeah. And if you don't, just pretend it did. Just humor me. I have this finger that I banged. This one is from, I took a baseball in the dirt. So I played softball until I was 45. And so that's, but this one I just banged on a piece of furniture and so I'm trying to make a decision of whether to have it fixed or not. Yeah, but this affects my keyboarding, you know, and so I've been to a doctor who has said we can either fix the tendon, but that's going to make it fragile. You know, if you bang it, it's going to go right back. Well, I'm not going to protect my hands. Or pin it, and that'll make it stationary. So I have this decision to make about that. Any suggestions? Yeah, mine is worse than yours, I think. It's really, and I type fast, and I don't want to do that. So this is how I make my feet. I always use a paint palette knife instead of a straight fettling knife because I like to, when I'm doing the thin layers, I like to be able to scrape it up and not scrape my knuckles on the table. I'm making 8 marks. I don't measure, no. So they're not always perfect. I do, don't I? I didn't even look at them. I did get one of these things just to make marking it easier, but mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. Does she do this kind of a foot? What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do have our own style. Yeah, it's nice and sharp. Yeah, it is half the fun of making. It's a painting palette knife. What kind of knife it is, John, she asked. I'm trying, John. Trying to cooperate. No. She asked if I have to sharpen it, and I don't. I like that little bend in it. Now the cleanup, I usually wait and do that when it's not quite so juicy. So then it sits up nicely. And one of the things that happens is when I flatten it is that it emphasizes that proportion between here and the foot. So it pushes the stability or that idea that it's wider than it looks like it should stand up. What's that? What was the question? Have I? Oh, fine. That's what I was worried about with them. Actually, I'm going to kind of cut that off anyway, so I'm not going to worry about it. Now I want to use this as a little template to cut this other side, or at least mark it. This piece, this kind of piece? They're all slightly different. This part is a little bit more rote than, and I vary this. Sometimes I go straight down here to mimic this, sometimes not. But then when I do the top part, that's just spontaneous. That just is, yeah. How many of you have been to an Ensika? Yeah, there have been a couple in Portland. Oh, really? Oh, you just did a day pass or something? Yeah. Sure. Well, that's how they pay for it, right? Yeah. Yeah. It's a great organization. Yeah, it was. It's big enough. It used to be that we would do them just in a hotel. And they're too big now to do that. This part? The whole process, you mean? Oh, I'm doing something that I just do normally, that I often do. She asked if I thought ahead of time about this, what I'm doing here. I suppose I did think about it, of course, but it's one that I've done. I probably wouldn't come to a demonstration like this and do something completely new. I might look pretty awkward, huh?
produce that safe
No. Yeah, it's really, I'm not trying to do, I'm not doing a bunch of exploration here. I'm doing something that probably follows the thesis of that little piece that's in the container. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Possibly. Yeah, probably. I like the lift of the pot. She asked if I could trace this back to that Taiwanese pot, and I think I can. I think that my pieces have elements of Asian influence and classical European, Italian, Greek, whatever. Influence, definitely. I'm going to cut that crack off. See? I threw this a little bit thick because I didn't know which ones I was going to facet, you know, to show you how I do the faceting on the, so this one's a little bit thicker. I normally wouldn't make them this thick if I know I'm going to not facet. Yeah. So much easier with the needle tool than it is with that knife to mark it. I'm considering when I go back home, just working on hand building, and the same elements I think will come out as they do here. You all have these rasps. I love this one, particularly the one that's narrower down here. That's how I do the facets on the bowls. Yeah, this is what is it, Cheryl? Mud Tools. Yeah. Yeah, this is a great tool. I have the other ones too, the ones you buy at the hardware store. Yeah. Yeah. What? You could bend it. This guy's made a fortune on these wonderful tools that he makes. Of mud tools, and yeah, they're not mud tools. Oh, yeah. You what? Good. That's pretty. Move some of this stuff here. This is good tea. Delicious. Yeah. What kind is it? Pardon? What kind is it? Oh, does it really? I'll have to look at it. Now I think we got rid of the crack. Good.
Sorry, right in the middle of everything.
Yeah. Do you have any of this slip?
Do we have any of that slip around? We can make some slip. Yeah. I have oodles at home.
Have you?
Yeah.
One thing I really like about a smooth clay is that you can do this to it and it doesn't reveal a bunch of grog. Ooh, that was fast. Oh. Yeah, because you'll just bisque fire these, right, John?
Yeah. And then
So-
go up on
Yeah, that's fine. What's the matter? Oh. Clean this up too a little bit. I just bumped that.
That's okay.
Is it okay? Yeah, I'm just busy.
Yeah, good. Focus. Stay focused.
Yeah.
It's a little bit strange having you running.
Well, I don't think about it.
That's good.
I'm a klutz anyway, but this is exposing a little grog. When it's porcelain, there's nothing to be exposed in it. Is there any foam? Just a piece of foam to lay on this so I can. Okay. It doesn't matter, just maybe that thick or more. Perfect. This one of these is fine. Thank you. Hmm? My phone's ringing. Did you get that, John? Just kidding. That's what I like about this hearing aid. It's ringing in my ear, but you can't hear it.
I think you're buzzing.
Can you? Yeah, it's fine. It's not Hollywood, I'm sure. So. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. And I'm glad you have the cameras because it won't be easy for you to see what I'm working on here. I didn't bring any wires with me, but I like to buy springs and pull them and then cut the clay with them. So gorgeous. You use a slab roller here? I don't have a slab roller. Is that really loud in there? Okay. So I have to, John, ask you about Shiro's. You know, I know that he sold, and then he opened a new restaurant, and that's down where there's a lot of homeless and problems now. So, yeah, is he still in business there?
Yeah.
Is he?
Yeah, we're doing good.
Good. That's great. Pardon? No, I like to do this. I really like to do this. For me, it's just a part of the process, you know. And I love this kind of a roller, too, because it makes an even slab. It's like cooking. Lily probably has these for making dumplings, right, John? This
Yeah,
kind?
she loves this kind of roller.
Yeah.
But I think that's what they use a lot in China.
Yeah, smaller ones.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
don't have handles at the side.
No, yeah.
For the smaller ones, they use smaller ones they use the smaller ones for making the little dumpling wrappers and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, they're little, like this long,
Yeah, fits in your hand.
but they don't have handles. Yeah,
Nope, they just,
right. I like that. I like that in a rolling pin. To me, this is just part of the process. I like seeing what happens to the textures on here. This is, uh-huh. Yeah. And then I love it the way it will smooth. It's so beautiful. I always compress 4 ways on each side. Don't ask me the science behind it. Just do it.
is it a wise preference or they just like
It was the way I was taught, just not in school. I just from going to workshops and stuff. I actually think it was Christina Bertoni, the one who was at Anderson Ranch, because she makes slabs really thin, big slabs thin, and once she gets it to maybe a little thinner than this, she rolls it between wax paper and then compresses it and then puts it into these large molds, but then not wax paper, puts it between plastic, and you keep rolling and pulling it off, and I can demonstrate it later if you want to see that, but it really compresses it. She uses the plastic to keep it from ripping, because by then the weight of it is so thin that the weight of it would tear it. It works beautifully. I don't know how long I have to make these. My wallpaper roller. This is my Joe Bova scorer. These are needles put in if there's a channel cut into this cork, the wine was very good. And then an adhesive put inside there. And I have others that are flat here, so they won't roll off the bench. But they make a good scoring tool. Sometimes I think watching a hand builder is like watching paint dry, right? So talk to me. What do you want to talk about? This is a wine cork, and then there's a groove cut down, channel cut down into it here, all the way across. And then this is filled with an epoxy, and then the needles are stuck in so that the points stay up. And I have a couple of them, like one has them 4 across and different configurations. There's a Joe Bova tool. You all know who Joe Bova is? No? He's a good ceramics artist. He lives in Santa Fe. He taught at LSU and at, usually on this, I usually just do one line scoring. And do you have a paintbrush? I had a sip of tea while she gets the paintbrush. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'll lay this down so you can see it. Sometimes I extrude these, but I do love an extruder. I love the marks that an extruder makes on a pot. Can you buy wooden needle tools anymore? You have a wooden needle tool? I always sharpen the other end of it, so it's adds another tool. Now it's lopsided, right? I do a lot of cleanup afterwards because I don't know why, but I do. You can also use a piece of paper to do this. And John's probably shown you that. Just a fuller sheet would work, but just by taking a sheet of paper and doing this, you get a nice edge, soften an edge of a slab. Do I have a what? Oh, okay. I think they're making these in plastic now, and that's not as nice as the wooden ones. Are the linoleum rollers in wood?
They have wood ones,
This is teetering now because of the heavier. That's what you have. Gotcha. That's a good organization of tools over there. Did you do that, Kathy? Oh. What else do you want to know that I might be able to help you with? What? Oh, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Good idea. Wow, wow. From here? Yeah. Yeah. Now this is getting unstable on this on the phone. I'm going to move this. Okay, now another thing I do when I'm working is I step back a lot. So if you all had two-dimensional or three-dimensional design, and so I think about the formal issues and the formal elements of this, and the two-dimensional qualities as I'm going to build up. Here, this. I want to keep this slab so I can use it for the next time. But now I just look at all these tools and I think, okay, what do I do? And how many different ways can I use this tool? So I love the fresh look of a tool on clay. And then it's my job to try to keep it fresh. Yeah, and I have them in different sizes, and this one's got pointed curves. So, yeah. And then these rolling pins, sometimes, I'll show you that though next. Never mind. Hold that thought. Now sometimes when I get a texture like this, then I like to toss it out and see how it will distort. This is a nice clay. Talk about my scoring technique. Yeah, I don't score, on this I don't score more than I need to. And another thing I like to, I just use the needle tool usually. There are so many different methods, like Martha Grover, you said she was here?
You did a Zoom work.
Okay, she scores and then wets. And I was just watching Jen Allen at NCECA, and she does it a different way. You know, everybody has their own little way. You just want it to. Then I love to be able to go in and push this out and get it to expand just a little bit and warp the texture that's on there. I did. Yeah. And then the slip goes on, usually on this piece that's going on, and it'll fill down into that area. I just do it spontaneously. Yeah. Usually back and fronts are the same. I don't know why, but they are. I'm a symmetrical person. I just like symmetry. So there's another piece of content. You think about what symmetry is. It's equality and all of that kind of stuff. So here's an example of, I really like this edge, of just watching what I'm doing and seeing something that works better than what I was thinking. And I'll just flatten this inside edge a little bit. And then this is going to go on top of that part of it. So it's just a matter of what I see at the time. So I'll control these and make those more symmetrical. The rest of it is more spontaneous. But I was on the way to doing this side, and that happened. Go figure. No, no. Only these textures do I repeat. And like something that just happened that I totally wiped out was my slapping it down picked up some little scraps. And if I weren't just trying to do this, I should have left it and then used it separately. because I like that. But it led to me at one point just taking the shavings from this, and I'll show you that, but I'm taking the shavings and just slapping this down on them. I really like that. And then maybe stretching it out, or, you know, whatever. And I can leave that and still do what I did over there, here. Now don't try to make these marks all exactly the same. It happens as it happens. I do tend to use similar tools. I didn't bring all of them, but I do tend to use the similar tools, but then I try to see if I can use it in a different way. It's like those tiles I made at the Archie Bray Foundation. You know, I wanted to, some of them were made with the same tool, but not in the same way, just trying to use the tool in a different way. Well, I layer in between. Now, after I get this done all the way around, another one of these will go on. And then I usually build up, you know, to 2 or 3 layers that way. But because I get goosebumps with some of the things that the clay will do when I roll it, and I'll show you that too. Goosebumps, it's my, what? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Really? Oh, funny. I have a physical reaction, you know, kind of a chill, maybe. Like, say, yes, very much so. Yeah, yeah. So these are similar, but not exactly the same. So then I will take these scraps and roll them into these thin layers. And this is where I really like this bend, because I can, when I've used a straight fettling knife, my knuckles scrape, and I don't like that. Now, I don't even score these. I just kind of do this, and then I like to ruffle them up. You think? Well, you know what? Usually I'm listening to a book or music. Tom Waits was my studio. So I'll put these thin layers in too, and I'll put some all the way around. Pardon? I'm listening to one called, what is it called? I can tell you. Here. Yeah. Wait a minute. Hold that thought. It's called Fly Away by Kristen Hanna. You know that author? Yeah. You know that book? No. It's really good. Yeah. No, they're dysfunctional. I'm a dysfunctional potter. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I would probably do a little paddling. I really like to do these textures and then paddle them flatter. So I would probably do more of that if I were going to use them as a functional piece. And I would make sure that there weren't any leaks in where I'm attaching these, you know. But you saw the picture of the heart. And see, I love these little papery edges. I almost became a printmaker just because I love the decal edge of paper. It's the same aesthetic as this. So if I were going to write about these thin layers, I would think about fragility, fluidity, words like that that would give meaning, and then I have to accept that as a part of my work, that fragility and it's, yeah, you know what I mean. And there are times too when I love to do this. I'll do this right now before I get all the way around with that. Where I'll do something really thin. Thinner than that. And maybe I'll texture it. Maybe, let's see, what could I do to texture this? I need a toothbrush. But what I'll do sometimes is just put a little slip on the back and I'll just throw it at it. And I really like that. Oh, yeah, I use a brass brush from an automotive store, usually. Yeah, that kind of thing is good. Okay, good. Thank you. And I like to throw a little down inside of it too, and have it just land spontaneously. And I own that in that I'm a spontaneous person, and I like to have the work have a fresher, kind of uncontrolled. Sometimes I'm uncontrolled. Ask my husband. I used to have a collection of noses in the bedroom, in the drawer next to my side of the bed. And sometimes he'd wake up in the morning and lean over to kiss me and he'd bump into a nose. Had to keep him on his toes. You know? I had clown noses. I had a pig nose. I had a donkey nose that had big teeth. I had all kinds of noses. That's as far as it went. I mean, that he would laugh when he would wake up and bump into my nose. He just doesn't ever know what's going to happen. This? Uh-huh. This line, that's a strictly formal issue. I just want it to be more organic, although a lot of it has to do with This is very plain. I want these sections as I build up to be broken up by a line that relates back to that. And otherwise, people wouldn't notice the texture if it was all texture. So that's really just a delineation of the form I'm building. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I've been called a formalist, and I've been called an abstract expressionist. Been called a lot of things. I also like to tear the edges. It happens a lot that I'll be, doing something else, and I'll see the edge like I did earlier. Like this just really attracts me. This little thing that happened. And so I'll probably put that in somewhere. But that doesn't mean that I have to put it in the same on both sides. I'm not ever going to get this again, which again, I own, because we're never going to get this again. Every day is a different experience. It's kind of like a river. That water is not going to come by there again, and nothing is going to happen exactly the way it does. So the spontaneity of these, there's a balance of control and spontaneity in it. And again, my philosophy of art professor, who actually ended up, I was at Carbondale, and he actually ended up at University of Florida in the philosophy department. Great. He said, we look at tradition as something that is dependable and reliable, and it's always the same. And yet, he said, tradition is a balance of innovation and sedimentation. So we all, let's take Christmas, and not everybody, or Hanukkah or whatever. There are certain things that our parents did and our families did that we retain, and we bring it forward. But then we innovate. So Christmas or Hanukkah in your home is going to be a little different than it is in my home, but you probably find the same colors or the same symbols, etc., around. So he said that tradition is that balance of sedimentation and innovation. And if we have too much innovation, we have chaos. So if I made this entire pot out of this texture, it would be chaotic. I'd really have to work to make it hang together. If we have too much sedimentation, we get stagnation. So tradition is a living, changing concept. It's not history. It's not that we want to make everything the same all the time. It's changing, and yeah. And I like that. And again, I think it's a part of what I do. I was giving a talk in China once, and this man, after I finished talking, I used the words excess and constraint about my work. Someone had written that about my work one time. And so I liked that, and I said that people had said that my work was a balance of excess and constraint. And this man stood up and he said, "You said excess and constraint." He said, "Sometimes I think it's a little too much excess." I thought, okay. And that reflects my life. Again, this is all about me. Don't you get it? Yeah. So really, I hope I'm demonstrating that every decision we make, I can explain. And whether you get it or not, you may just like the form. You may wonder how I did a certain portion. But you don't have to get all of it. But I don't make a lot of decisions about the work that I can't explain in some way toward my life. It's like that salad I showed. It's a mixture of everything. I'll tell you this. This is being broadcast, right? I shouldn't tell them. Yeah. Well, lately, I have been drawing more than I have been in the studio. But I get up every weekday morning and I go to our aquatic center and I do water aerobics 5 days a week. One day it's 2 hours because one is a core class. And I do that 2 days a week. And then I come home and I answer emails and I draw or write or whatever. I haven't been working much in clay because, as I said earlier, I need to think. I need to know where I want to go next with it. And I just haven't done that yet. But otherwise, I would probably be in the studio in the afternoon. That's when I go and draw or do different things in my studio. We eat our big meal at lunch, and I love to cook, so from about 10 on, I'm cooking, and then we just snack at night, so my afternoons are a little more flexible than my mornings. Yeah. My pieces are not, she wanted to know if this is heavy, if they're heavy with all the layering. My pieces are not even intended to be really thin and light. Pardon? Heavy, yeah, physically heavy. Yeah, it's not like if you threw a pot like this and for function, that it would be a little heavy because and I'm not trying to keep the wall thin. This part. Yeah. Yeah. But as top heavy as they are, they're still stable. I'm not top heavy, but probably 10 or 15 years. The layering came about. It was funny. I was in grad school, and Harris Deller was my professor. And I had realized that I was loving, like that wire going through the clay. I just thought, oh, this is great. That spring going through the clay. And I had built this architectural kind of form with that on the sides. And my professor, Harris Deller, came into my studio and he said, "What are you doing here?" And Harris is a man of very few words. And I said, "Oh, I want it to look like layers." And he said, "Elaine, you know how to make layers." And he walked out of my studio. And I thought, yeah, I do. I can do this with layers instead of making it look like layers. So I started doing this. I started with this method of working. The forms have changed, have evolved. Because I do the teapots, I do some other things that I love that form that's like this, and then it's domed with the spout, that ewer form. I love that form. And it's that dimension between this and this, the way it comes in. And so I may go back to that, but I think I might coil instead of throwing. I like to hand build. I like to coil. I smooth them over because that's this part, that I would coil. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, at Insika, I went for a good part of my time and watched the functional potter demonstrate, and she's a hand builder. Did you go there to Jen's? She was so good. And she uses templates. That's where I would have to maybe vary from what she does, because she uses a lot of templates, and I might try that. Jennifer Allen. She goes by Jen Allen, and her work is pretty amazing. Than the photographs. I think so too. And it looked poorly crafted. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. No, she's really good. She does things like were you there when she brought in the In-N-Out burger fry, the fry, she and her husband, Shoji, went to the In-N-Out drive-in, you know what that is, and they got